The Book of Remembrance of Enoch, Chapter 11. Tablet of Badal, the story of Enoch and Essene, an account of the early development of Maween and of the nature of the authority of man with Anokeesed in creation. Now after I had looked with Urim, to behold all that has been written concerning how Enoch had named the sons of heaven, and how he had reprimanded the Darkar Darchoi, and divided the waters of Senur, I looked again, and I stood before the Lord, and I found that I was once again looking at Enoch standing beside the rock of Emeth, and the power of that which he had accomplished there was still fresh upon my soul. And it came to pass that as I looked, the view before me began to move away from me, and my view of the mountain and the regions round about became more fully into view. And in the midst of this, Enoch was seen to be very distant and small against the grandeur of the mountain. And the Lord began to speak marvelous things into my ears. And a richness of understanding came upon me as I looked with Urim, and my understanding is after this manner. Now Enoch was standing facing toward the west, and the summit of Mohiah was before his eyes, to fill the lofty places of his view, and very large ice fields were upon the mountain, and the spring melting caused much water to flow down towards him in the river, to be divided at the rock of Emeth. And Enoch was a tiny speck of human flesh in the midst of the majesty of creation, and yet even being a little speck, the words and feelings and doings and thoughts of Enoch are said to change the entire course of the earth and of man in the midst of creation. And it came to pass, as I viewed these things, I marveled that Enoch could accomplish so great things. And I thought, how, Lord, can he do these things, seeing he is but a speck in the midst of creation? And the Lord said, he has authority. And I said, Lord, what is authority? And the words of my Redeemer were very clear to me. And he said, authority is when a person knows the desires of Anokeesed, and they are willing to act in the midst of creation to bring to fulfillment those desires, both in the lives of men and in the midst of creation. And the Lord said, neither I nor my Father give authority, but each man must find it for himself by living his life in such a way that he can know the desires of Anokeesed, and each man must be instructed to know how to set his hand to bring those desires into fulfillment, and Kahee may instruct him in many different ways in the time of his need, and also built into the souls of the Urkodeshoy is an awareness of the needs of my Father, and instructions also reside there to satisfy the willingness of those who have set their hands to act in his behalf. And also it is given to the righteous to instruct one another by the power of inspiration and the gift of wisdom. Now understand, my son, that there are three kinds of authority. There is the authority of Elda, which is that which you have witnessed with Enoch, and there is the authority of the world, and there is the authority of Senasiol. In each case, it is the knowledge of desire and a willingness to act to fulfill that desire that brings and sustains whichever kind of authority man has sought. For when someone knows the desires of the world and of those who exercise control over their fellows, and they are willing to act to fulfill those desires, then they are known to act with the authority of the world. And when someone knows the desires of those who dwell in Senasiol, and they are willing to act upon those abhorrent desires, then they receive a full measure of the authority that Senasiol has to give. And each kind of authority has a responding counterpart, and that response is the source of that which sustains authority. And those who act in order to fulfill desires and yet have no response are known to have authority that is empty and void. And the Lord continued, and he said, built into the fabric of all creation is the presence of my Father, as you have known. And because he is there, there is a spirit resident in all of the Urkodeshoy that is a longing and a strong hope that all of his desires will be fulfilled. And it is natural and spontaneous for them to respond to righteous man with help and assistance and support, and with the strength of that which gives them life, when they encounter an object of creation, to be willing to act upon a knowledge of the desires of Anokeesed, who is the one they love, and that response is that which sustains and magnifies the authority of Elda. Likewise, there is a spirit of longing for the desires of those who shape the wicked world, built into that which they produce, and that spirit will also respond to sustain and declare worldly authority, and give those who love the world intuition for the meaning of subtleties. And again, built into the Darkardar Choi is a longing for their evil wishes to become fruitful, to produce control over the lives of the oppressed. And the Darkardar Choi will also respond to uphold and enlarge the authority of those who love that which dwells in Senasio, and the works of darkness in this way can abound. And it is this action brought by the response of the living souls in creation which brings the strength of authority to man to accomplish notable things. And this is so, whether they belong to Anokeesed or the world or to Senasio. And it came to pass that the Lord said, the authority of the world and Senasio only rise up to show their ugly faces for brief periods. But it is the authority of Elda that remains with a man in the midst of eternity, so that he can act in behalf of the welfare of Yod and Maween according to the desires of Anokeesed. And when a holy man has a continuous and ongoing awareness of the desires of Anokeesed that supersedes a present moment, then it has come to be called priesthood authority. But my Father calls them his men of service, reference number 142, Strong's number 7218, God's designation of the Merari, or that is to say, his band of excellent ones, reference number 143. It is interesting to note here that God views priesthood as a collective, and because of the sustained and effective authority of the men of service, the wicked greatly fear them and liken them to a poisonous serpent who will strike out against them. And the Lord said, any virtuous and holy man can have the authority of Elda, but holy and virtuous women, by their nature, can only have it for use in present moments. And for them it cannot be continuous and ongoing, because they minister to present needs. And men can have this authority in a continuing way, because it is given to them to know and establish the definitions and purposes of all of the souls in creation, which definitions and purposes remain to extend beyond any present moment. And women are given to know the meaning of life, and how all things are joined one with another, each according to their present needs, with regard to the desires of Anokeesed, and for this reason, their knowing of the desires of Anokeesed is rightly applied to present needs, for it only has application to the present by the inherent holiness which Anokeesed has given them, and men are not able to accomplish this holiness in joining, and women must rely upon the authority of their husbands or other men in relation to the past or future. But a man can act upon the desires of Anokeesed which encompass the past, the present, and the future, and to those who have this authority, there is very little distinction between a present moment and the past or the future. And the Lord went on to say that there are portions of the authority of Elda which make up the whole, and they arise out of unique abilities of his people, to know specific kinds of desires of Anokeesed, for no one person can know of all of his desires, and herein lies a principal benefit, for the Lord to have man dwell in community. And it was the task of Enoch, after he was instructed in these things, to identify those unique abilities to know the desires of Anokeesed in the men of Yod, and to establish them for the benefit of the people of the Lord, and not one of the unique abilities to know his desires is above another. And it came to pass that Enoch did as he was directed by Motsah the Lamb, and he established these various callings among the men of Yod, and it was done by the element of righteousness to magnify each one in their calling and purpose. And there is nothing among the wicked that can equal it. And these are the divisions of the authority of Elda, whom Anokeesed calls the men of his right hand, or the men of Yashiyah, reference number 144, Strong's number 376, and number 3027, God's word for priesthood. One he calls Kaser, reference number 145, Strong's number 2691. We have called these men teachers, and they have the ability to know the desires of Anokeesed for his people in the villages and settlements and encampments of the people of the Lord, and in their sweet fellowship together in community, and they are like shepherds over the people, or that is to say, village pastors. And another Anokeesed calls Sekel, reference number 146, Strong's number 7922. We have called these men priests, and they are the ones who have skill at knowing the desires of Anokeesed for his people in their needs for understanding and wisdom, and in their ability to love one another, and in their love for repentance. And yet another Anokeesed calls Labe, reference number 147, Strong's number 3820. We have called these men elders, because they can know the feelings of his heart for his people in their needs for healings, maturity, and growth, and in perfection of virtue. And another Anokeesed calls Selekah, reference number 148, Strong's number 5547. We have called these men apostles. And he calls them this because they can know the desires of Anokeesed for the prosperity and effectiveness of Yod, addressing the consequences of agency with the power of a sure knowledge of forgiveness in the midst of Maween. And lastly, there are others of the men of Yashiyah, reference number 149. The word priesthood comes from number 3550, the priest office, which comes from number 3547, to put on regalia, to officiate, to bedeck oneself. There are several words for office, number 3653 and 3651, to stand in a station of the just, the perfect, and the right. Another word is number 5656, bondage, number 4612, Muhammad, and number 4931, visitation of a chief official. All of these words for priesthood and office do not appeal to those who view their service to God in the terms that the Lord explained to Enoch when he told him his view of the authority of Elda, whom he calls Abarah, reference number 150, Strong's number 5679 from 5674. We have called these men high priests, and these are the principal men of service, and he calls them Abarah, because they can know the desires of Anokeesed for his people and for creation, and they can thus know of his desires for both man and the Urkodeshoy, in their needs for understanding and wisdom, and in their ability to love one another, and Motsah the Lamb in his marvelous ability to bring an understanding and an awareness of sin, and the joys of repentance and forgiveness. And these can draw a sure response from the Urkodeshoy to change the course of the earth. And when the men of Abarah and Yashiyah are present among the people of the Lord, then they all begin to express the nature of that authority to bring man and the Urkodeshoy together, and they have become known as high priest communities. And when these various divisions are established and magnified by the use of the element of righteousness, then it is incumbent upon each one of these men to act to magnify their unique ability to know and act upon those specific desires of Anokeesed, and to not vary away from that which has been affirmed and magnified to them by the use of the element of righteousness. And because of the use of the element of righteousness to establish these things, the living souls in creation, who are the Urkodeshoy in the midst of Elda, have been charged by their Creator to acknowledge their commitment by responding with support of blessings and healings and protection, and in the purifications of the people of Yod and Maween. And all things can be accomplished for good because of this, and great and marvelous things were done in the days of Enoch because of the response of the Urkodeshoy to the men of Yashiyah. And the desires of Anokeesed began to take form in the lives of men to be revealed upon the earth by the authority of the divisions of Elda, and great was the joy in creation, and great was the dread of all the wicked among the sons of heaven. Now understand that since the beginning it has been the intention of Anokeesed that the whole human race would have available to them this authority of Elda. For are they not the very objects which all of his creative love points toward? And each one must find it for himself, according to his vision of created purpose. And this is a part of the delight of Anokeesed as the creator of mankind. Foreseeing that a man and his rib were created to be the companions of Anokeesed, and to comfort him in the way there is resident in the soul of every man and his rib, the expectation by Anokeesed that they will know of his desires in his loving kindness for his children and for creation. And he is just certain that they will want to act to bring them to fulfillment. And thus this little speck of human flesh called Enoch can stand beside a rock to divide the waters with the element of righteousness, and by the words of his mouth, and the feelings of his heart, and the doings of his hands, and the thoughts of his mind. He can, and indeed has, set the course for the whole of creation, that not a single person would be born upon the earth without having the spirit of inner knowing, of how to divide good from bad, or right from wrong. Reference number 151. I think that this point was a huge force which led to the destruction of the Nephilim, which had no conscience. And the response of the Yaatsekawad to him has magnified the authority of Elda, and it is only the authority of Elda that can go before the people to raise up and establish the soul of Maween. Now it came to pass that after Enoch learned of these divisions, as it has been written, he departed away from Mount Mahuya and the barren waste places of the east, and he returned to his home in Anaway, and the effect of his righteousness began to influence the establishment of Yod. And the spirit of joining began to fill all the hearts of the righteous, and the wicked were told that there was a great movement among all the people in the regions of Enoch, and the people began to collect together in their joy, and they began to seek out those and their families who were spread abroad, and a new spirit of life came in upon the earth. And in the years that followed, important changes began to manifest themselves among the people of Anokeesed, for they began to confer together so that they could purify their use of element, and they found that there were some few among the righteous who had been using the element of righteousness to retaliate, and they repented mightily before the Lord, because the element of righteousness is meant to be used only to bless and heal and protect. And they followed with the counsel of Chavah to instruct all of their people that any variation away from this was not pleasing to the Lord. And they began to willingly purify their expressions of virtue and their speech and their actions and their behavior, insomuch that no one among them was found to be rude before the great Holy One. And they began to travel across the land to and fro, to seek out those who knew the righteousness of the ancients, and they began to recall together the manner and customs of the immediate children of Yaatsekawd and Chavah. Reference number 152. The absence of any role of Yaatsekawd and Chavah in discovering the ancient righteousness seems mysterious to me. And it came to pass that many began to abandon their waywardness, and they began to rehearse to each other their sweet encounters with the presence of Motsah the Lamb. And they began to organize themselves in all of their observances and acts of worship, and a new respect for their elders began to be expressed by all of the people of the Lord, and honor for father and mother became strong. And it came to pass that there was a man among them named Abiathar. Reference number 153. Strong's number 54. The father of abundance. And he was the oldest son of Kathan, son of Yaatsekawd. And Kathan had departed on a journey alone in his old age, and he did not return. And no man knew where he was, nor what had become of him, but his rib, who was the mother of Abiathar, was with those of her children who remained to dwell with her. And at this time Abiathar was old, and he was very holy, and he had remained with his father since the beginning, and his father had fled into the hill country to the north and west of the encampment of Nod, at the death of his brother under the hand of Kenneh. And a few of the children of Canaan had left the hill country to spread themselves abroad, but most remained with him there for many years, and they were isolated there, and did not have contact with others of the children of Yaatsekawd. And it came to pass that as the people began to travel abroad, news came to Abiathar that there was a people who were intent to establish weddings after the manner of his father. And upon hearing this, he determined that he and all of his people would leave their isolation in the hill country and go to join with the people of Enoch. And in his old age he was greatly stirred to leave the hill country to be with the people of the Lord. And many of his children and offspring were not married, and they all were greatly burdened with sorrow because of it, for they had thought that their rightful companions dwelt among the wicked, and all they had known were the wicked. And when the righteous began to collect together, they discovered that this was the case with many among them who also remained unmarried. And I beheld the people of Abiathar coming to meet the people of Enoch, and word had been sent ahead of them that they were coming, and they all descended down from the hills, driving their flocks before them, and they numbered about 240 souls. And their dust was observed in the north for 2 days by the people of Enoch, and their arrival was greatly anticipated by the righteous there. And it came to pass that they fell upon each other's necks with the joy of their meeting. And the people of Abiathar were dressed in a strange manner, and their hair was unkept, and their children were very shy and afraid to see strangers. And they marveled at the dwellings and the food of the people of Enoch, and they laughed together as they tasted the food. And they had never seen a Kelly before, but they had heard of them from their father Cathan. And they spoke with a language that was hard to understand, and they were all very tender toward one another. And the people of Abiathar taught the people of Enoch many things that were known to the ancients. And these people were looked upon with great respect. And they brought to those who dwelt in the regions of Enoch rich understanding in their pursuit of the ancient ways and in humility. And it came to pass that after a while, when Enoch had met Abiathar, and his people had formed a settlement near Anokeesed, Abiathar began to desire to be taught all that had transpired with the children of Yaatsekawd since the beginning, and the tablet of Set was a great comfort to him, and he wanted to know all that the Lord had instructed Enoch. And Abiathar was old, and he could hardly walk, and he had 2 young boys who would assist him when he had a need to travel. And Abiathar took great interest as Enoch expounded to him that which he had done for the Lord, to divide the sons of heaven at the waters of Sinur. And it came to pass that after Abiathar had pondered upon these things a good long while, he had his young boys espy out the land for him, and he instructed them to find rocks that appeared similar to the rocks of Simca, according to the descriptions that he had heard. And when they found such a place, he was carried there to perform a worship before the face of the great Holy One, and he prepared with all diligence for this worship. And he went with a small company of the righteous, and his wife was with him, and Barakah and Edney and others. And it came to pass that a storm descended upon the plain, and when they were assembled before a large stone, he pled before the face of Anokeesed, and his speech was very plain and simple. And he said, O Anokeesed, you have brought division among all of the peoples of the earth, but you have not done it good enough. For there are many of your holy ones who languish for a companion, and they should not have to go among the violent and the wayward and the wicked to seek them. Will you not do more to complete the division you have started? And will you not see to it that in a day in the beginning of creation of each soul among the righteous, that the rightful companion for them will be found among the righteous? And then he wept. And after a while he said to Anokeesed, O Anokeesed, how can I know that you will listen to me and make your divisions more complete? And after he had ended his speech before the face of the great Holy One, lightning hit the earth, and it struck the rock that was before him with such force that it split the rock asunder from top to bottom, and all of those who were there were shaken and knocked to the earth. And when they arose to their feet, Abiathar had his young men move him to the rock, and the gray hair of a thin old man shone with the lightning flashes. And he stood there to behold the rock that was split right in half. And the two halves touched at the bottom, and Abiathar put forth his hand, and he placed dried mandrake seeds as the element of righteousness in the place where they yet touched. And he said, "This rock shall stand forever as a testimony that through all the course of the earth among the righteous, their rightful companions will always be found in the midst of the righteous, and they will not have to seek among the wicked to find them." Hallelujah. And thus Anokeesed made the division between the righteous and the wicked more complete because of the doing of the hands of Abiathar, and to this day the righteous will be blessed because of him. And after those days, the joys of the worship of the rocks of Simcha were seen to be observed often, and the sorrow of loneliness was done away in Maween. Now it came to pass that the wicked saw that among the righteous everything was astir, and they began to send their fellows out to spy out the land. And they began to be seen by the righteous upon the high places round about, and they would draw near to peer at them by their fires at night. And there were those among the wicked who were very fearful of the righteous, and they desired to find the means to subdue them or destroy them. And all these new activities among the righteous were very mysterious to them. And the wicked could not join together in any way, and they could not be strong to come against the righteous, and they could not form any army or any group of strength, for there were no armies before the flood. And the first armies were brought about by the influence of those who built the great tower after the flood. Now understand that in the days of Enoch, the wicked had various ones among them who were looked upon as prominent, and these were known to be very powerful with their use of the element of wickedness. And the people of the land of Tawah and Heleah were bound up with the souls of Senasio, and they called their use of the element of wickedness the works of their hands. And no man among them dared to spread abroad the manner of the element they used, or that which they did with their hands, lest, when it became known to the wicked among their fellows, that element would be turned to be used against them. And for this reason all things among the wicked were done in secret, and through the avenue of secrecy the desires of Senasio began to spread abroad upon the earth like a cloud of filthiness, and they all took great delight to find advantage and control over their fellows. And they began to bind one another together with curses, to enlarge the knowledge and the effectiveness of their secrets, and in this way they began to form small bands. And thus it came about that among the wicked there began to be small bands of people that were divided according to whatever elements of wickedness that they had bound themselves to with curses. And it could be seen that it usually was an old man with young ones to do his bidding, and their women were carefully excluded from a knowledge of these things because of the doings of the wife of Lamech. And it came to pass that the divisions among the wicked began to be exceeding fierce. And as the wicked began to develop their congregation of Senasio, it became their desired way that each leader of these bands would carry a weapon upon him made of Asael, after the manner of Lamech. And the weapon was called by them a seku, reference number 154, Strong's number 7915, and number 7906. And each man with a seku was afraid of the others who had them. And thus the unity of Yod among the righteous was able to be established in the midst of the wicked, while they were divided and weak and separated from one another. And these two great forces were known to be a significant part of the great war in heaven, and the war became exceeding fierce upon the land. And it came to pass in those days that Edney bore a son, and on the day of his birth there were seen eruptions on Mount Mahuya, and smoke filled the lofty places, and they named their son Amazyaddad, because the Lord said it was to be his burden to comfort the righteous who desired to gather unto the soul of Maween. And during the formation of Yod, Amazyaddad grew, and he became strong and swift in his travels like unto his grandfather Mahuya. And he became one of the men of Abarah, and he was very brave, and he was very skilled at blending into the Erko Deshoy, insomuch that he could remain hidden from whomever he chose. And when he was a young man, Amaziyadad joined with some few of his fellows, and they bravely went into the lands of Tawah and into the regions of Heliah, to see if they could discover any righteous there who desired to escape to the land of Enoch. And because of their skill and their efforts, many of the righteous there escaped and were directed in the way towards Enoch by this little brave band being led by Amaziyadad, son of Enoch. And it came to pass that the wicked soon discovered that there were those about who were helping people among them to escape, and they tried many times in vain to discover who it was that was accomplishing it, and they fretted and complained, and they inquired of their diviners, and many rumors and superstitions arose in their efforts to explain it. And they said it must be phantoms, and they began to be weary, and to set guards around their camps and villages, and the wicked were vexed with uncertainty. And it came to pass that after 4 years of Amaziyadad and his little band returned home, and they had known hunger and thirst, and they had every kind of hardship in their service to the Lord, and they rehearsed stories of dread that they had witnessed among the wicked, and they knew of many who were not able to break away from the northern lands of the wicked. And the wicked came to the land of Enoch to try to find those who had escaped them. Now the people of Yod began to assemble in large numbers for their protection, and so they could enjoy rich fellowship with their loved ones. And they worshipped and had traditional times that they met, and they began to abandon the settlements on the borders near the wicked and in all of the outlying areas. And many of these settlements were established since ancient times, and some of them were ignorant as to the righteous ways of the ancients, but they greatly desired to learn, and they were a very humble and happy and holy people. And it came to pass in those days that the wicked began to come in upon those who tended the sheep, for the sheep cannot find food in the great grasslands, but must find pasture in the hills to the east. And the men were obliged to tend the sheep for the women and children in order to protect them. And in this way it came about that the people began to be in the want of food, because the men could not pursue their prey in the hunt, and they had to graze their sheep further and further away from the eastern borders of the grasslands, because of the abundance of the flocks of the many who had gathered to Enoch. And it was their custom to gather a seed while they tended their flocks, and the many people were depleting the seed in their customary places. And they also found that they must go further and further into the great grasslands to find fish and the herbs of the marshes. And as the years went by, the people became exceedingly more and more perplexed for their want of food. And it came to pass that the daughter of Enoch and Essene, who was their firstborn, who was named Pethuiah, joined with her husband in marriage in her 42nd year. And the name of her husband was Jezreel, reference number 155. Strong's number 3157, God will sow. And he was the son of Ayathan, of the encampment of Kodesh, reference number 156. Strong's number 6944, from number 6942, to be clean and sacred, son of Yaatsekawd. And it came to pass that during these years of hunger, Jezreel and Pethuiah had many children, and one among them was named Ikar, reference number 157. Strong's number 406, pronounced Ikar. And he was very short, and he took a wife in his 32nd year, and she loved him dearly, and they were very happy together, she being nearly twice his height. And Ikar the short was a man who walked with Anokeesed. And he was a companion to Motsah the lamb, and his wife was named Tobi, reference number 158. Strong's number 2896, pronounced Tobi, because she was very good and an honorable woman. And it came to pass that one day Ikar was traveling in the way, and he was downcast because Tobi was about to deliver again, and all of the people were in want of food. And as Ikar went in search for food, the Lord Motsah appeared to him in the midst of large rocks, where Ikar sought to catch conies. And I beheld the Lord speaking to him, and the Lord is pointing to the ground, and he is calling him, Ikar, my son. And the Lord took up a stick, and he is instructing Icard to till the ground. And the Lord is tilling it before him with his stick in small circles. And the Lord taught him to place the seed in the ground and to cover it from the birds. And it came to pass that Icard left off his hunt, and he immediately returned home rejoicing, and he went straight away to his grandfather Enoch. And he rehearsed to him all that the Lord had said to him. And the people began to stir themselves with excitement, and they began to till the earth, as the Lord had instructed. And they began to plant a seed, and onions, and some kind of bean. And they found that the ground was too rocky, east of the grasslands of Anak. And the best land to till was at the very edge of the great grasslands. And soon this strip of land was found to be too small and dry. And it was determined that they would gather all of the people together and travel in a large company to the northeast, into the northern regions of the grasslands of Anak, where the valley of Simca spread out into the land, where there was a broad, fertile plain between the grasslands and the hills. And also there was much water there, and the ground was moist all year round, and the marsh fields there were very vast, and filled with water birds and herbs for food and material for their homes. And when they were all assembled, and they had gathered up all of their flocks and possessions, Methuselah would not go with them, for he had met a maiden at the place of water, as she was passing through with her menfolk, and he was determined to go into the borders near Tawah to find her. And after those days he never joined with his people again, and he was never heard from again, and his family could only assume that he married the maiden, and set himself to remain there where she was. And he named his firstborn son after Lamech, to appease the father of his wife, and Lamech, son of Methuselah, was the father of Noah, who called forth the flood. And travelers would report to Essene that he sought much after prestige among his fellows, and she grieved in her soul, and his wife was named Iona, because she was said to have betrayed the testimony of her fathers. And Iona supported him in his desires for a high standing among his fellows, and she was a descendant of Kenneh. Now it came to pass that in those days, when the people began to settle in the north parts of Anak and to the east, Amminadab took a wife, and her name was Milu. And she was very gracious, and she was from the hill country, east of the regions of Anak, and east of the valley of Simca. And all in her family were very pure, and she was much loved by them all of her days. And she had only known tenderness and the presence of Anokeesed. And when she married Amminadab, she had never seen nor known a wicked person, and she had not experienced any person being rude before Anokeesed. But there were many times her people had known great want, and they had learned how to provide for one another in times of the distress of hunger. Now she was called Milu, because she was determined to see to the fulfillment of the vision of her husband. And his vision was to carry the burden of the Lord in his affection for his loved ones in Maween. And Amminadab was exceedingly intent upon the welfare of the righteous in the outlying borders of Anak. And many times Milu would accompany him as he went in search for them to discover how they fared. And Milu was very strong in the face of depravity. And it came to pass that the people grew together in their grace before the Lord, and the men of Yashiyah became very strong in their knowledge of the truth, and they ministered before the people day and night, according to their needs, and their comradeship as compeers among themselves abounded, and they stood as men together before the Lord, being bound by their compassion and their duty to service. And in those days all of the hosts of the Yaatsekawad rejoiced together to see the soul of Maween arise and become strong. And for them it was as though they could taste Eden again. And Abel rehearsed the many wonders of Eden into the ears of all of the Yaatsekawad. And it came to pass at the time of the espousal of Amminadab, far away in the remote regions of Heliah, in an empty field, there sat an orphan maiden, begging for food along the way. And many travelers passed through the nearby settlement, and where she sat was called Bakad, because of the much deceit there. And it came to pass that an elder among the bands of Seku of Bakad, seeing that she was heavy with child, took her into his home to care for her. And by she delivered a son, and she named her son Kohath. And he grew up under the instruction of the wicked. And in his day he was able to cause numbers of the wicked to band together, and to ally themselves, and to join with one another in their wickedness. And they began to find the means to become confederate together in larger numbers. And they formed a secret society under the leadership of Kohath, and it was called the Society of Seku. And these men plundered the regions all around, and there was terror in the land of Heliah. And because of men like them, fear ruled all of the hearts of the people, and the Society of Seku began to extract provisions from the peoples of the settlements, and thievery began to increase until the men of this order no longer had to provide for themselves, but they lived on plunder and upon the labor of others. Now Amazyaddad, son of Enoch, was a man among the Eshyad, with the same calling and Abarah as his father, and under his hand the lonely people of the Lord were able to find peace and tranquility in the communities of the righteous. And after he took his Rid to wife, the band of Amazyaddad continued to journey in the lands of Tawah and Heliah in search of the righteous, and they did so without him. And with the rise of the secret society of Seku, the righteous began to be very troubled with the reports which were brought to them, and many agonizing prayers from the people of divided families came into the ears of Motsah the Lamb. And as the division grew more and more intense between the wicked and the righteous, Enoch and Edney became increasingly alarmed for the welfare of the righteous. And it was under these conditions that Enoch began to fast, to see if he could discover what element of righteousness would aid them in the preservation of the people of the Lord. And all the people knew that Enoch fasted. This concludes the book of Remembrance of Enoch, chapter 11. Shalom.